Hello. Today I want to talk about being yourself. Right now, here in Carré Saint Louis, in the middle of my neighborhood, Plateau Montréal. As I've said before, and I'll say again, there's a lot of suffering in life that is, unfortunately, is just it's unavoidable. Right? You can't get around it. But there's other suffering in life which is totally avoidable, right? Suffering that we impose on ourselves because we have unrealistic expectations of the world, unrealistic expectations of ourselves and of other people. And I think the injunction to be yourself is one of those really, really kind of problematic ideas. It's Now, before I say everything that I think is wrong with the idea of being yourself, I will say that obviously there are things that are right with it, right? So there's a reason why we have this injunction to be yourself, right? Before the advent kind of modernity, it was just the norm that if you were a baker, it was because your father was a baker and his father was a baker. If you were a farmer, it was because your father was a farmer, and so on and so forth. So it was really, really hard for people to break out of their station in life, and your expectations were quite fixed. So the idea of the celebration of the individual, and the idea is that individuals can decide what they want to do. Career-wise, can follow the pursuit of happiness, right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That people can decide where they want to live to a larger extent than ever before, what they want to do, who they want to marry. Right? That these things aren't all fixed. These are big wins, right? I definitely, if I was trying to extol the virtues of the modern West, I would say that the freedom of the individual and the ability of individuals to make their own way in the world. I think this has been a fantastic win. It's a good thing for the most part. However, the problem is we've taken this way too far at the moment, right? And so now what it's actually become is its own kind of rigidity and its own kind of imprisoning ideology. So, for instance, everything that we learn, right, whether it's language, right, there's a reason why we call your mother tongue your mother tongue. It's because that's the language that your mother spoke or speaks, right? Or your primary caregiver, which is usually your mother. And you learn language by imitating, by copying, right? And the accent that you happen to have, you weren't born with that accent. You got that accent because you copied the way in which people spoke the language or languages that you speak around you, right? And everything, all the way you dress, these things are all a function of you copying other human beings, right? And yet at a certain point, we decide with the ideology of authenticity and be yourself, we decide that it becomes fixed and that you're not allowed to change anymore at a certain point, right? And you might say that is at 12 or 16 or 20 or 25, and then any attempts that people have to try and change after that point that you've decided is their end point, you say, oh well, you're being fake, right? You're being false in some way, right? And this is why very often, if you want to actually become a better person, if you want to better yourself in certain ways, you run into the problem that people that know you in a particular way will be very resistant to this. They'll say, well, you're being fake, right? You're not being authentic anymore. I like the old you, right? You're putting on airs now, right? This is really, really true when it comes to things like addiction, right? People who have like a really big problem with like heroin or like a coke habit, or they're really they're drunks, or whatever. It could even be just that they are stuck in a kind of a criminal lifestyle. Very often when somebody like that wants to change, and this is really sad, your best friends can become your worst enemies, because your family could be can be your worst enemy because they don't want you to change, right? Maybe because they like you the way you are. Maybe it's because they feel like, you know, you trying to get clean or trying to better yourself or get an education or something like that. This actually makes them feel bad about their own life choices or about their own inability or unwillingness to change and kind of make a better life for themselves. And so you have to keep this in mind, and you'll maybe have to buck up against this ideology of be yourself and be authentic, right? If you want to better yourself. Also, if you want to make relationships work, whether it be with friends, with family members, if you want to, you will have to make compromises, and those compromises will often involve doing things that might seem sort of inauthentic, right? I mean, just to take a crazy example, but I think it illustrates the point. Imagine if you got into a relationship with somebody and they told you, you know, a little bit into the relationship, maybe like, I don't know, a month or two in, they said to you, now, look, I need you to know that in all my previous relationships, I cheat on everybody, right? Or I don't know, I don't like to flush the toilet. I don't know, I like to or something completely weird, or and you just understand, you need to understand that this is like part of who I am. This is my personality, and you need to love me for me, and you have to just, you know, you have to be okay with this. I mean, obviously, most people are going to say, well, that's ridiculous. Like, no, maybe you've done that in previous relationships, but I'm not cool with you doing that in this relationship. You're gonna have to actually try and change that about yourself, right? And that's a very reasonable request, right? And, you know, very often at the beginning of a relationship, people do this automatically, right? And this is one of the, you know, I talked about in my video on falling in love, that very often when people are first at the beginning of a relationship, they will misrepresent themselves, right? Precisely because they want the other person to accept them, right? There's a hilarious example that Alain de Botton talks about in his essays in love, where he talks about when he first meets this woman named Chloe, who he falls, you know, crazy in love with. Well, two things you need to know about Alain de Botton. He really loves wine, and he hates chocolate, right? So when they're on their first date, he completely misrepresents himself on two occasions about these two things. So first of all, when the waiter brings around the wine list, she says to him, you know, I don't really need to drink tonight. I have to get up early for work tomorrow. So yeah, I'm totally fine with like just skipping the wine. Now inside he's screaming, no, I want the wine. But he wants to be kind of the same as her. He wants to please her. And so he says, yeah, no, that's fine. I can totally take the wine or leave it as well, right? Then later on in the evening, they're talking about previous relationships and, you know, that how they failed and, you know, what went wrong in them. And Chloe mentions, well, you know, there was this one guy and we were doing great and it seemed like very promising, but then I found out that he didn't like chocolate. And I thought, well, forget it. I mean, how could anybody not like chocolate? Clearly there's something very wrong with this guy. And so she broke it off. Well, he hears this, of course, and he thinks, oh, wow, okay, well, I'm crazy about this woman and I really want her to like me, and I want her to, you know, I don't want her to give up on this when it's just, you know, barely even started. So he completely like lies, and he's when they're bringing around the dessert, he orders the triple chocolate, a piece of the triple chocolate cake, and he's like, oh yeah, that looks amazing. You know, actually he can't stand chocolate, right? So very often at the beginning of something, people will actually violate the rule of authenticity, right? And they'll just do it automatically because they want to be loved. They want the person to like them, right? Now, generally speaking, what happens is after they've gotten more comfortable in the relationship, they then back out of that, right? And say, well, actually, no, this is the real me, and you need to accept me for me right now. I think what Alain de Botton says in Essays in Love and elsewhere is very sensible. He says, actually, we should sort of take some lessons from what our impulses are at the beginning of a relationship and carry those into later stages of the relationship. Like, so that authenticity is not necessarily the best way to be all the time. It makes sense to actually have a much more flexible attitude and kind of a willingness to compromise, right? Well, enough about that. Another thing on sort of being yourself that I would say is important to distinguish is the whole idea of, like, we have conflated being yourself with being original, right? This is a mistake. This is, I think, a very big mistake. Being original is, sometimes a function of genius because somebody is just like a, total genius. But often being original is just sort of accidental, right? It's sort of in the same way that there's a limited amount of beachfront property in the world, right? There's a limited amount of times when people can be original, and usually it's just a matter of people being first, right? So if you think that you have to be exceptional, if you think you have to be like weird and outrageous and strange in order to be yourself, that's an unrealistic expectation, and you're just going to constantly feel like a failure, right? I think a much more sensible approach is the approach that you find in, like the Roman Stoic Epictetus, right, in his Art of Living, when he says that, we all have the seeds of greatness within us, but if we want them to germinate and grow, we have to water them and we have to encourage them. And how do you do that? Well, according to Epictetus, if you want to be a better person, if you want to be a better version of yourself, then find people who have the qualities that you want and emulate them, copy them, right? There's nothing wrong with that. That's how you learned a language. That's how you learned almost everything that you know. It didn't come standard issue as hardwired instinct. You learned it from copying people. So there's nothing wrong with self-consciously adopting the habits and mannerisms and ways of people that you respect. In fact, that's how you become the best version of yourself, right? So I would say, rather than be yourself, unless you're a saint or you're some sort of fully actualized, amazing person who's figured it all out and you totally kick ass, okay, if you're like that, then sure, be yourself. But if you suck, and all of us suck in different ways, don't be yourself. Be someone else, right? Be the best version of yourself, right? Strive to be a far better version of yourself than you actually are. That would be a better way to be. All right, take care. Bye for now.